Good morning. This is Miriam Moskovich, and I am coming to you from our latest coffee break at BCD Travel. I lead research and innovation here at BCD Travel, and today we've brought you some content around our vaccines and what's going on with digital health passports and sort of the time in between now and when we fully get back on the road and get back to business travel. These sessions are typically 30 minutes long, and that's how much prepared content we've brought for you today. We will stay on for an additional 15 minutes to do some casual Q&A, so we hope you stay with us for that. We are going to get started right away, and I've brought my usual friends. I brought Mike Eggleton. He's Director of Research and Intelligence here at BCD Travel. I've also brought Jorge Mesa. He is Director of Global Crisis Management here at BCD, and we are going to get right into the content. Mike's got some good information and intel for you, so I'm going to let Mike take it away. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thanks a lot, Miriam, and good afternoon, everyone. I thought I'd like to start by reflecting on where we are exactly right now with the pandemic. And many countries around the world are currently in lockdown, particularly in Europe, and in others, their citizens are under certain restrictions. So before regular travel can resume, clearly these restrictions and lockdowns need to ease. Increasingly, countries are adopting COVID metrics, such as the numbers of infections or test positivity rates, to determine when they reopen their borders, and when they do, who they let cross them. They're also using these metrics to create lists of safe or high-risk countries. And so it means that when they reopen their borders, they're not going to do it in a uniform manner. And if we look on the left-hand side of the chart to see what happened, what was required before the EU decided to reopen the Schengen area in the middle of June last year. And as you can see, case numbers virtually had to reach a very low level and stay there for some time before the EU was confident enough to allow international travel to resume between the 26 member Schengen area member states. Clearly, on the right-hand side of the chart, we're in a much different place today. You have the likes of France, Germany, Italy and Spain arguably experiencing second waves of the pandemic and potentially entering into third waves as well. But in some respects, the numbers have been inflated by increased testing. Governments, airports and airlines are all testing more than they did before. And in some countries, whole towns or cities are now being tested. And as a result of that, you're going to see far more asymptomatic individuals being picked up. So that's going to inflate the testing numbers. That's not to say that COVID-19 cases aren't at an elevated level. They are, but the situation isn't as extreme as it may well seem. And of course, we have vaccines. The end of last year, the UK, the US were some of the first countries to approve vaccines, and now a number of countries around the world have approved more than one vaccine and are starting to roll vaccines out. And of course, with every person that's vaccinated, that's one less person that COVID-19 can affect. So in time, those infection rates are naturally going to start coming down. So in my opinion, the slope of the curve is going to fall, and it's not going to need to fall as far as it did in mid-June for countries to start feeling that they can relax borders and travel can resume again. But are our business travellers ready to resume regular travel? Well, we asked our travellers, and between 30th of November and December the 6th last year, we surveyed our travellers. And we got responses from 708, which was, we felt, a pretty good response rate given the short time span we gave them to respond. And we asked them a number of questions. And the first one was, when did they expect regular business travel to resume? And a small percentage, 13%, told us they were already travelling regularly. And a similar percentage told us they expect to travel within the first quarter of 2021. But things really are going to ramp up in the second quarter of the year, so that by the middle of 2021, more than 60% of our travellers told us that they expect to be travelling regularly once again. And by the end of the year, that figure could easily be above 90%. So there's all good reason to be optimistic about the outlook for travel there.
I want to ask you a question, Mike. So we have asked this question before. We asked it to our travelers in May, right? And again, later in the year. And how does their optimism now, given the knowledge of the vaccine, differ from the way they felt when we asked them earlier in the year? Because we did ask travelers, I think it was like April or May, right in the heat of all this. So if I remember correctly, their optimism always kind of was about 6 months in the future is kind of was their horizon.
Yeah, I think you make a valid point there. The shape of that curve seems to be the same whenever we ask people, when they expect to travel to resume. So there seems to be the usual makeup of the population in terms of how optimistic they are and how pessimistic they are. One point I feel I need to make is that when we did this survey, this was before the UK, Brazil and South African variants had hit the news, which is clearly a negative point. But at the same time, it was also before the first vaccines have been approved. So there's a positive and a negative that we need to account for since we did this survey. But yeah, this is a curve that keeps shifting to the right every time we survey people. And what I'm really looking for is a change in the shape of that curve. Going forward. So I'm sure we'll be surveying our travellers once again in the next couple of months, and then once we find out what they tell us that time, then we'll be sharing it with people outside.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the next thing we asked travellers is, what is it that they're looking for to give them the confidence to get back out there travelling again? And unsurprisingly, they recognise the importance of easing local and national lockdowns. I mean, let's face it, we've been there before back in the middle of 2020. So, and a number of us back in lockdowns again. We clearly know that that's something that has to happen. But one thing that has now emerged and is the top development that travellers are looking for is the vaccine. And in fact, 83% of our respondents told us that they were looking for the vaccine as key to returning to travel. Another thing that they're looking for are improved COVID-19 treatments. And it seems with every week we're hearing about doctors who are discovering an existing treatment for a condition like arthritis actually can have some benefits for COVID-19, be it reducing fatality rates, or easing the symptoms, or reducing the number of patients that find themselves needing intensive care. So again, we're moving forward in the right direction there. They also recognise the need for testing, and of course that's almost become part of everyday life for most of us. And something that few of them recognise at this stage, it wasn't really on their radar, but we think it will become increasingly, and we're going to touch on it later in the presentation, are digital health passports. So, vaccines are number one on the list, but what do travellers actually think of them? And our travellers, almost 3/4 of them were broadly positive about taking the vaccine. 16% were still undecided, but there's 10% that don't feel they'd like to take the vaccine. And the fact that there's 75% that are positive, that's good news, particularly when you take on board comments from Qantas CEO Alan Joyce, where he was stating that Qantas won't carry passengers on international services unless they've been vaccinated. If more airlines follow, in Qantas's promise, then there's going to be around 1/4 of the travellers who may find some restrictions on their international travel options, and it's certainly a problem for the 10% who won't be vaccinated. And it won't just be airlines, countries may start mandating vaccines as well as a condition of entry. And why it's not going as far as that at this stage, Cyprus, for example, has said that if you're vaccinated, you won't need to test before arrival, and you won't need to quarantine. So it certainly means that travel becomes less disruptive if you're vaccinated. And if countries start to mandate vaccines, then, following on from what United Airlines has said, airlines will have no choice but to require passengers to present proof of vaccination before they'll let them on board.
And I want to interrupt with another question. I'm sorry, but
sure.
Have you heard of any jump the line schemes at all for corporates? If you want a visa today, you can wait for 4 weeks, or you can pay a premium and get your visa tomorrow. Are there any jump the line schemes that you've heard of, other than the naughty black market stuff, which not our interest?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a naughty black market issue that I've certainly seen reported in Nigeria, and that one's particularly obvious because Nigeria doesn't have a vaccine yet. So if you're in a country where there's no vaccine and you're being offered a vaccine, then you clearly need to start asking questions. At the moment, as far as I'm aware, almost uniformly across the world, it's the governments that are buying the vaccines. It's the governments that are rolling out the vaccines. That's not to say a lot further down the line, you'll be able to buy them privately. But at the moment, the priority of governments is to get the vulnerable vaccinated and then get the rest of the adult population vaccinated so we can return to normal. That's not to say that, in time you will be able to buy them. I mean, if you look at testing, for example, that used to be almost sort of government controlled, but now you can buy PCR tests almost anywhere, and there are kind of jump the queue developments in that area. In Vienna Airport, for example, there's something called COVID Care Premium, where you can be tested and then be guided through the airport experience by a member of staff. So I think where we're seeing it in testing, inevitably we're going to see it in vaccine, but I don't think it will be for a while yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so clearly, vaccine is key, but we know that it's an important personal decision for many people. So we asked travellers what sort of things did they think about before taking a vaccine, and unsurprisingly, risk of side effects was the top one. Anyone who's been on social media has seen all the concerns and the alarmist reviews about vaccines that are developed within 9 months when it should be 10 years, those sorts of things. And, that's clearly raised some concerns with some people. But the second thing that they identified, independent reviews, they can help to allay those concerns. And another factor that travellers are considering is the reputation of the pharmaceutical companies that are producing the vaccines. And I'm sure a number of you, many of you had heard of AstraZeneca or Pfizer or even possibly Moderna before the pandemic. These were companies with well-established reputations. The important thing is to look beyond these names as well, though. For example, the AstraZeneca vaccine is known as the Oxford vaccine in some countries, or in India, it's promoted as the Covishield vaccine. So, you need to look beyond the simple name of the vaccine that's being presented if you are concerned about the reputation. And of course, there's a downside to reputations as well. The Russian company Gamaleya has produced the Sputnik V vaccine, and that has attracted some suggestions in media that it's been rolled out before it's been fully tested. And then you have some Chinese vaccines where the efficacy or the effectiveness of the vaccine has varied considerably depending on which country it's been tested in. And that's where you can circle back to the independent reviews to address any concerns about reputations. Travellers are also concerned about their own health. Are they healthy enough to take the vaccine? Are they looking for it to protect their health as well? And they always have other concerns. Turning to a different survey, and this is from the World Economic Forum, so this isn't our own data, but I thought I'd include it because it sort of reinforces the findings from our own survey. And they asked people why they wouldn't take the vaccine, and you can see almost half were concerned about the side effects, and that was the top concern that we had from our own survey. A further fifth thought they were worried that the vaccine just wouldn't be effective. 14% low personal risk was their reason. These could be people that have had COVID-19 already and think that infers some form of immunity on them, or they could be people in the low risk groups, people in their 20s, 30s and 40s. But reassuring for the veracity of our own findings, the WF concluded that 10% wouldn't take the vaccine, and that confers pretty well with our own findings. There's also another slide from the World Economic Forum, and I do apologise for the number of colours on here, but we coloured the lines just so that you could see the different regions. So you have turquoise for Asia Pacific, Latin America's in green, Europe in orange, North America in red. But it shows an important point that views about vaccines will vary by country. Now, most of those countries in this selection, more than 60% of the population have said they're prepared to take the vaccine. Now, that's a little bit short of the 70% that scientists are looking for, but it's encouraging all the same. But some of the things that I'd like to point out, firstly, we've got the UK there, which is, it's different to other European countries in the much higher level of acceptance of vaccines. And I suspect that's because we've been hit so hard. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you have Russia and France with around about 40% only of the population saying they'll take the vaccine. Now in Russia, that could be due to the Gamaleya Sputnik V issues. In France, now I don't know this for sure, I've just heard it anecdotally, it could be some issue to do with mistrust of government in France, but I'm prepared to be corrected on that one. But it's interesting to see there are some real variation between how willing people are to take the vaccine. Now vaccines, are an important solution, but they are only part of the solution, part of the path back to safe travel. Vaccinations are clearly starting, and they're starting in an ever-growing number of countries. But widespread vaccination is going to take time. Many countries still haven't approved or purchased or ordered vaccines. Even here in the UK, where we were pretty much ahead of the game, we only recently approved the Moderna vaccine, and it wasn't one that we'd ordered before. So now there's been a rush order through for that, and we don't expect the first vaccines to come until April. Other countries have, gambled and unfortunately got it wrong. There were so many countries putting vaccines out there. Governments had to take the gamble, take the risk, and order and decide which vaccines they were going to go with. And some of them have yet to be approved, and they may be the ones that they're betting on. So they're going to be rolled out at different rates depending on the country. And even in emerging markets, Nigeria being an example, they're waiting for the COVAX consortium to start delivering the affordable vaccine that they're going to depend on. And even once you start vaccinating, governments are tending to prioritise vulnerable groups. And by that, we mean the elderly, people with underlying health conditions, health workers, but these typically aren't the core business travel demographic. So it's going to be a while before typical business travellers get vaccinated. And governments are facing a unique task, a massive logistical challenge. They're being asked to basically vaccinate their entire adult population in a matter of months, something they've never really had to do before. And of course, they're learning and they're making mistakes, and they're having to correct these mistakes, and they're having to manage vaccines that require different storage temperatures. It is a massive logistical challenge. So while vaccines are an important solution towards safe travel, they're not an immediate solution, so it's going to take time. So until they're available at a level of critical mass, we're going to have to rely on other measures to underpin the resumption of safe travel. Measures like easing of lockdowns, track and trace apps, testing, digital health passports. And we asked our travellers about these. First thing we did was ask them about track and trace. Now, these have been around for some time. I seem to recall that India launched a track and trace app as early as March last year. But increasingly, countries are making track and trace apps mandatory. If you want to come into their country, you need to download their app. And in Hong Kong, is a particularly extreme example, is that on arrival, travellers have to wear a track and trace wristband. They have to isolate for 21 days in a hotel room. If they tamper with that wristband, or if that wristband tells the authorities they've moved outside their hotel room, they can face imprisonment and a hefty fine. So it's worth following the rules. Now, track and trace apps aren't just a condition of entry. They will also help you move around the destination. In Singapore and Malaysia, for example, you need to tap into restaurants, hotels, public transport with the track and trace app. And among our travellers, 48% of them were generally positive about using these apps. Another 35% were undecided, but 17% were negative. Now, clearly there are some privacy issues with track and trace, but if you want to travel with freedom, ironically, you may have to surrender some liberty. We also asked them about testing. Now, testing has been a true enabler It's played a vital role in easing lockdowns, and it's being required by more and more destinations. Only recently, the UK, the US, France and Canada have all mandated pre-departure testing. And among our travellers, 65% are broadly positive about the need for testing. But it's important to read the small print. There are a number of issues that you need to be aware of. The type of test, this varies. We have PCR tests, antigen tests, LAMP tests, and variants of these three core types. And so you need to make sure that you are actually taking the test that is required by your destination. And you need to make sure the language is correct. Typically, the certificate to show that you've delivered a negative test result, typically it's English or the language of the destination that you're visiting. But there may be other languages too, and this varies by country. So again, you need to check and make sure you've got a certificate in the correct language. Your name also needs to be correct. Now, I go by the name Mike, but officially on my birth certificate, on my passport, I'm Michael. So if I get a certificate, I need to make sure it's got Michael on it, because then that will match what is on my passport. So when I'm trying to cross the border with two different documents to gain entry, they've both got the same name on them. Timing is another issue. Countries specify different times within which you must test before travel. Typically, you need to test within the 72 hours before you depart for your destination. But in some cases, particularly in Africa, it's as high as 120 hours. And in China and Hong Kong, it's as low as 48 hours. So again, check well in advance of your trip to find out when you need to be tested. And you need to make sure the test is authentic. It needs to be by an accredited and genuine laboratory, and one that is accepted by your destination. As we move through the pandemic, the risks of fraudulent offerings are clearly increasing. And as well as pre-departure testing, we're also seeing a rise in on-arrival testing. And of course, the more times a traveller has to be tested during their trip, the risk that they're going to be quarantined at some point increases. So travellers and travel managers need to be prepared for this eventuality.
Thanks, Mike. So before we shift over to Jorge, I do want to point out, I think it's interesting how you had mentioned such variation by country, variation by airline, and how critically important it is. As much as we do our best to stay on top of the information, right? This is all current as of this morning, 9:23 a.m. Mountain Time on the 20th, right? But it's really important that you check with your destination, you check the Informed Traveler, the BCD Travel Info Center, or whatever you might have access to. Anyone can come and use ours. We keep all that information as current as possible, but also check with the airline, check with the destination, because these things are really fluid. I just think it's really worth pointing out that with all this variation, and with, and I'll talk to Jorge in a second about, what is it going to look like to try to take a 48-hour, 2-day trip from the UK to Mallorca? Are we even going to be able to do that? What would that really look like? So we'll get into those details, but let's move into Jorge's portion. And why don't you talk a little bit about what you brought us today?
Well, the digital health passports, that's going to be the new hot topic these days. You're going to hear a lot about this name moving forward. The digital health passports, there's 5 key elements that we need to consider for those digital health passports to be valid and to be useful. The first one is the verification. Authorities need to be, this needs to be reliable. Authorities need to be able to verify the authenticity of the test that you will be certifying with this digital health passport or vaccination, and also the identity of the traveler. As Mike said, the names needs to match and all that. It needs to be secure. We are talking about health data. That is privacy, it's a paramount thing there. So it needs to be something that is protected from hackers doing some harm, but also from holders of these passports trying to modify some data in the passport. Needs to be accurate information. What you just mentioned earlier, Miriam, about the entry requirements, all that. Most of these initiatives needs to provide that entry requirements into their apps in order for the travelers to know what is required, how many hours the test, which vaccinations are required, and so on. So they know that they can fulfill those requirements. Also, they need to find out which are the certified test locations where they can fulfill those tests. Altogether, those apps should be giving you as a traveler good to go. You have the green light, so go ahead. Needs to be recognition and acceptance is another piece that is important, because this needs to be widely recognized by governments, by border authorities, by airlines, by maybe also other travel operators worldwide. And finally, it needs to be accessible. This needs to be something that remotely, from your mobile, you can use it, you can show, and also needs to be something sort of like the API that the checking people on the airports, they know that that person complies with the requirements. Needs to be some green check on the systems, so you can show that, and that's enough for you to move forward without giving any personal data away, without the persons on the border control and so on knowing any health and conditions from you. Those are the 5 key elements, but there is several initiatives, and I have some here. This slide has been changed several times preparing this presentation, because we keep adding more and more, and I'm sure Mike is also collecting this information for later from some sort of paper. The top ones and the most relevant ones at the moment, they are the ICC AOK Pass, which is the first one that was launched. That is International Chamber of Commerce, together with International SOS, SGS, another security company. They launched this in Singapore. It's mainly based in Singapore. Then you have Verifly, which is piloted and used by American Airlines between Miami and Chile, and now American already say that they are going to use it on all the international travel and all the destinations. Then you have Common Pass plus BCI. BCI stands for Verification Credentials Initiative. That is something that is supported by the World Economic Forum. It's supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. Plus, in addition, the BCI group is also collaborating with this, and behind that group you have the Mayo Clinic, you have Microsoft, you have Oracle, you have also the Council of Airports. That there is around 2,000 airports on that group. So it could be a very important player in this arena. There is already Cathay Pacific and United Airlines who already test those that pass. And there is already other airlines like Swiss, Lufthansa, they are already saying that they will be used that. Then you have Travel Pass. Travel Pass is the digital health passport from IATA, which it could be one of the big players as well, because it's the International Association of Travel Airlines. And so that is already working with the group IAG, which is British Airways and Iberia, and there is also to be launched in March. Then you have also IBM Digital Health Pass, working together with Salesforce. You have also another company which is Augmented Borders, that they're expert on a passport proxy solution. And then, of course, and Miriam, probably you are familiar with this, which is the yellow card, which is the World Health Organization traditional yellow card that it was used for vaccinations like the yellow fever, which was the only vaccination that it was required globally, that they are now launching a smart solution as well. And then you have also CCI Linux, which is an open source opportunity as well. So all that together is the current initiatives that they are going on around digital passports. I believe Miriam is saying something which I cannot hear.
Yeah, I muted myself. I just wanted to say, so, you know, in bringing you on, the expectation is that you would clarify everything and calm us all down and tell us everything was easy and concise. And then you throw up 10 logos on a page and say, and every single one of them has an impressive group of people working on the project, an impressive group of backers and funders, and then a handful of impressive airlines who are testing them. So what is going on? Are we waiting for major players to come out? Are there going to be a few that rise to the top? Do airlines choose? Do countries choose? Do I need 8 different apps on my phone? Just help me.
Let me, I'm sorry for confusing you, sorry, I'm trying always to help you here, but let me give you an example here, Miriam. When you go to a restaurant, you see some stickers on the window that it says credit cards accepted. So it's going to be something like that. It's going to be that you know that to travel to Singapore, you need to use the AOK pass, and then to fly with American Airlines, you might use this other pass. So this is going to go down to few of them, in my opinion, and it's going to be 3 major players, 4 major players, and probably you will need to be aware, the same as the entry requirements, which one you need to use for that destination. It's going to be something like that.
Are you willing to guess on what you think the major players are that might remain as the global standards? Are you willing to guess?
Let me tell you something that I forgot to mention about Common Pass, and it seems a big supporter of this initiative. That is a non-profit initiative. So the IATA Travel Pass relies on the airlines paying for that travel pass. So I'm not so sure how much money the airlines might have to pay for that, or go for the other one, which is free, right? So we might see those two as the big players, but we are following very close, day by day, any developments, and they're about to be launched.
Okay, thank you.
So if we move forward, we have another slide from the survey that we conducted with the travelers. What is important for them? No surprise. The importance of protect data, correct data, up to date. That's the top issues that they think that for a digital passport to be useful, needs to be widely accepted, needs to be simple to use, and something that we need to remember as well. It's something that needs to stay there. Needs to be something that can be used post-COVID as well. The World Health Organization already said to us there is going to be other pandemics coming up. So hopefully something like this digital passport will help us to deal with any other pandemics that might come in the future. So my guess is digital passport is here to come to stay, and we'll have other applications as well that probably people might enroll and might embark to use.
Okay, thanks, Jorge. All right, I'm going to summarize since we are at the end of our time here. We talked about a lot. I'm not going to read this to you here. The presentation is going to be available to you, and of course you can listen back on the replay. But we did cover, of course, the traveler sentiments and feelings around vaccines and the developments in resuming regular travel, being around digital passports and readily available testing and vaccines. So we hope you join us again. We are going to take some questions now. And I've got a bunch of great questions that came in here. Before we do that, I will give a quick commercial. You can always see our content on bcdtravel.com. We publish a ton of stuff where you can read more details on this report as well as others. If you are a client of BCD Travel, please join us on Connect. That's where the 3 of us hang out. So you can chat with us, talk with us. We share different content as well, stuff we don't share publicly. So be sure to join us on Connect if you're a client. Of course, we'll have future coffee breaks when we have more to share with you. And there is a post-event survey. We read that, all of us, and there's a couple producers with us too that you don't see on camera. We do get together, we read all your responses, we read your questions, and we love hearing from you. So please fill out that survey and send us a quick message. So thanks for that, and let's just get into some questions. So I don't know who wants to field this question, but I like this question here. Are there any exemptions to the 72-hour rule for the negative test due to a family emergency, right? So yeah, you can't go for 2 days to Mallorca from the UK, but what if you need to go to Mallorca because of an emergency? So can you talk a little bit about what those options might be? I don't know who wants to take the question.
I'm happy to take the question. I'm not quite sure whether I can answer it, but it does seem to be that if you look at any country's regulations under normal circumstances, when they're not entirely locked down, there always seems to be a long list of exemptions, and that clearly is going to change and vary over time. So I think it's always best to check in with the destination country and explain your situation. I seem to recall that was something that New Zealand allowed, for example. But again, it's going to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis if you have those sorts of emergencies. I don't know whether Jorge can add anything more to that.
That you are right, and also it goes country by country. So I heard that urgencies, personal urgencies, family urgencies in Malaysia, and people not able to go through, and you have exceptions in the UK and exceptions in Spain that you can go through if you're resident. So it's every time you need to check. Every government is different. Even sometimes in some areas, in some countries, it's up to cities or regions. So here in Spain, it's not the same Catalonia than Madrid or Balearic Islands. So it's something that it's necessary to check and validate.
We've got to stop talking about Spanish destinations, or I'm just going to go crazy and get on a plane and show up. Talk a little bit about corporate responsibility versus personal responsibility. If you're required to take a test, you're required to be vaccinated. Is that something you see corporations beginning to process, to create routines around, pay for it, reimburse travelers for that expense? Talk a little bit about what you think, how that's going to go.
Yeah, Miriam, that's something that we will see more, that some companies might be willing to pay for tests, might be willing to help their travelers to get vaccinated if they can, because currently that's not the process, that because it's up to the governments to vaccinate the population. But that is going to be each case, again, depending on the policies of the company. But this is something that, again, this is like the visa requirements or passport requirements. The corporations can enforce, they can promote, they can provide information, access, help, but at the end it's going to be each individual to apply, to comply with those tests, and do their part as well. So it needs to be a teamwork somehow with the corporations and the travelers.
So I'm going to ask, I think, a similar question. I'm just going to ask it a slightly different way. So what are the options for travelers who refuse to take a vaccine or are not eligible, right? Like my dad just got his vaccine, or first shot of his vaccine 2 weeks ago, but I probably won't get one for a long time. And I'm a former road warrior who's usually on the road every week doing stuff like this. So what are the options? Are you just going to tell me there's just no options? Deal with it. Wait, is that it?
No. I don't think that's going to be something like mandate vaccination, like Qantas was saying, that is going to be enforced next month. That's impossible. The population is not going to be vaccinated by then. So I believe that it's going to be a mixed setup where you can either have the test, negative test, in order to travel, or the vaccination. If you have the vaccination, probably then you will have no quarantine times. You will be able to go quicker. Otherwise, you will need to get tested and do other several process. But it's going to be people that they cannot be vaccinated because they are allergic, because they have other conditions. Things like that will happen. And for those, it's going to be the alternative is going to be the test. Of course, those tests, they are going to be much easier than we see today. They are going to be something that it could be even performed on the airports, as we are seeing in Heathrow, in Gatwick. So that's going to be something that is going to change as well, in my opinion.
All right, I've got another question for Mike. I know you've got this answer. You're muted, by the way. I know you got this answer because I see the work that you do. There's some questions in here about if there's regions that are traveling more now than others, who's emerging. Can you give us a little bit of lay of the land, at least regionally, as to what you're seeing in terms of, you know, tickets purchased, miles flown, people getting out on the road at all, Mike?
Well, for sure, China clearly stands out as, let's call it a region because it's such a huge country, that led the way. And certainly recollection of sort of recent figures, they're certainly on domestic travel, they're back at sort of the 90 to 100% of where they were before the pandemic. International travel is very restricted globally, but it does seem to be that, you know, it's going to reopen regionally. So, you know, you will get Europe reopen en masse with a few exceptions. We're seeing Latin America, I think, starting to reopen as things are calming down there. But I think we need to be prepared for it to be continually changing. You know, as we saw with the European example, we reopened Schengen, you know, and suddenly everyone within that group of 26 countries could start traveling internationally again. Of course, it's going to be, there's going to be a hierarchy in the way in which travel resumes. you will get domestic travel first. Then you'll start to get more short haul international, then you'll be going medium haul, then you'll be going intercontinental. And that's not just about borders reopening, it's also about exposure to risk and disruption. I would far sooner travel from the UK to Germany and then end up in quarantine than find myself halfway around the other side of the world and be stuck in quarantine. So as those things start to develop, I think people are going to be prepared to travel further afield. And of course, you can reopen the market and then a few months later it could close again if there's a local spike. As we've seen with countries like Australia, you get a couple of tennis players come in and they close down whole states because they don't want the risk anymore. So it's also down to national caution towards risk. I mean, looking as a European at the way that the US has addressed it, you guys don't seem to be treating COVID-19.
Watch it, Mike.
as in the same way that we're treating it. So, but that will change. As of today, that's likely to change. So, we're in a rapidly changing world, and that's where information and talking to people is vital. And we're doing our best to keep on top of it, but we can't always do that. So if you're not sure, reach out, contact people, contact your TMC, contact me if you're a BCD client. We're all there, and we're all trying to do the best we can to help out. But it is a rapidly changing environment, and I just wish it wasn't, but that's the way it is.
All right, another question in here. It's the way it's posed is pretty basic. Who is going to pay for this travel passport? But I think it gives you an opportunity, Jorge, to talk a little bit about, right? You'd mentioned one of those digital passport companies is a nonprofit, and then some of the airlines are backing others. So, maybe it's a multi-part question. Who is going to pay to develop these digital passport environments or schemes? And then who is going to be the consumer? Is it going to be a corporation purchasing bulk health passports to give to their travelers, or subscriptions, or is individual travelers going to buy at an expense? Is it free? Is it $2.99 at the App Store? What's going on?
So far, the only ones who talk a little bit about prices is IATA, and IATA is planning to charge to the airlines for the use of these digital health passports. It's nothing for the travelers to pay. It's going to be very similar to the apps that you are downloading for the different airlines that you download in order to do your check-in quicker and things like that. So it's going to be something similar to that. So good news here, the travelers will not be needing to pay at the moment yet, but of course we need to watch out who is behind this, who is maintaining all this data, who is maintaining all this technology, because that has a cost as well. And many people is asking, well, where is this data store? Where is going to be? Is anyone can have access? There is different blockchain is one of the options for maintaining the data. That's something that is ICC or IKPass is using. Others are talking about cloud-based, things like that. So this is something also to consider when choosing one against another, because we are seeing as well. We were laughing yesterday with Mike. We saw even a new company who is even giving you miles to use their digital health passport. So it's kind of like you need to check, okay, is this serious? Is this a reliable company? Who is behind this? All that is something that we will follow up in order to make sure that we provide the right information to our travelers.
So they're actually doing like loyalty schemes and that type of thing, these things now. Yeah. So I think we maybe finish up with one last question. And again, I think this is an opinion on both of your parts, is if we do have a scenario where a traveler tests positive during their trip, do you see airlines and hotels adjusting their cancellation policies to accommodate for this? Is a in-the-moment COVID diagnosis considered an act of God or goddess, and it's no longer gets you a voucher in a hotel room? Like, do you see the airlines, what's going to happen? Yeah, any lead on that?
You go, Mike.
Yeah, I'll go. I think
I want to say something as well.
It's like any of these things, it's going to change over time. If they want you to get flying again, then the airlines will do everything they can to get you flying and look after you. And then over time, then they're going to start saying, well, being vaccinated or not catching it is now becoming your responsibility. So I think it will shift around, and that will apply to all of the facets of COVID-19. So that will be, quarantine, testing, being arrested for breaking quarantine, all of these things. You're seeing medical health insurance being offered by airlines. That's to get you out there, and in time it will just become no different to any other disease or condition, and then we'll just be treated as normal travellers once again. We'll be surprised how quickly COVID-19 becomes the norm, or the pandemic becomes a distant memory. That's me being really optimistic. I want it to become a distant memory.
Do you have anything to add, Jorge, or you want to stay away from that?
This is something that, we deal with crisis in my department, so we always preach, you need to be ready for the unknown, you need to be ready for something might happen and things like that. So here is the call for the corporations, here is the call for our clients. Make sure you are prepared, that you have your insurance for your travelers, make sure that you have medical assistance for your travelers, make sure that you check the conditions. If anything like that happens, that you are able to change that ticket, you are able to stay in that hotel. So make sure that you have support in case that I'm sending Miriam to Mallorca and she needs to stay there for 15 days because she cannot go back, something like that. So be sure that you are ready.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Jorge. And maybe next time we get together for one of these coffee breaks, we will all be in Mallorca. So thanks for your time. Yeah, we will see you the next time. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.